My name's Mike, and back in the day I thought I had it all figured out. I used to be this laid-back happy guy who believed life was just easy. You work hard, stay decent, and everything falls into place, right? Well, turns out I had it all wrong. One night flipped my world completely upside down. A night I'd give anything to forget. That night wasn't just bad. It shattered everything I believed in. It was the moment I realized how quickly your safe little bubble can burst. Narrator's note. Funny how life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you. Just when you think you're steady on your feet. Huh. Anyway, if you're into real-life stories that make you think twice about the people around you, stick with me here. Hit that like button and hang out till the end. You're not gonna want to miss this one. Now let me backtrack a bit. My dad, Greg, was the kind of guy everyone respected or feared depending on how you looked at it. A self-made millionaire, he built his empire from scratch. After my mom passed away when I was a kid, he never remarried. Maybe he was too heartbroken, or maybe he just figured he didn't need anyone else. Whatever the reason, all his focus turned to me. I was his world, his pride, his joy, the kid he poured all his time and energy into. Sure, he was busy most of the time. Business deals don't stop for bedtime stories, but he never let me forget how much he cared. We lived in New York City, surrounded by flashing lights and skyscrapers that seemed to touch the clouds. It was exciting and overwhelming all at once. A life full of privilege and fast-paced ambition. Dad would casually point out mansions or luxury buildings and say things like, "Yeah, I own one of those." Honestly, I never even knew how much money the guy had. It felt limitless. And, of course, with that kind of success came powerful friends. My dad wasn't just a businessman, he was part of the elite, rubbing shoulders with some of the most influential people in the city. Big fancy parties, exclusive events, and high-profile conferences, that was his world. And as his kid, I was right there by his side. One person always seemed to stand out in those circles, David. According to my dad, David wasn't just a friend, he was family. They'd met way back in college, hustling together before either of them had a dime to their name. Over the years, they built their businesses side by side. A bond forged through success and struggle. Dad would always say, "With David, I feel like I have a brother." Narrator's note. In hindsight, maybe that bond wasn't as pure as it seemed. But at the time, I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. David was always around, charming, charismatic, the kind of guy who could win over a room in minutes. He had this way of making everyone feel important, like they were the only person in the room that mattered. I grew up seeing him as part of the family, almost like an uncle. I could talk to him about anything: school, work, life. He always had advice, always had a kind word. But here's the thing about people like David. The better they are at earning your trust, the harder it hits when you find out they're not who you thought they were. At first, there wasn't much to question. David was polite, generous, and supportive. He'd compliment me, saying how smart or capable I was, like a mentor, boosting my confidence. But every now and then I'd catch something, a certain look in his eyes, like he was sizing me up. It wasn't obvious, just enough to send a tiny shiver down my spine. I brushed it off, told myself I was imagining things. Narrator's note. Denial's a funny thing, isn't it? It's like your brain just doesn't want to deal with the truth until it's staring you in the face. The night that flipped my world upside down started out as unremarkable as any other. It was one of those upscale events my dad, Greg, loved dragging me to. A glitzy party held at some swanky hotel. This time he was the keynote speaker, and I knew how much effort he'd poured into his speech. Naturally, I tagged along like always. While Dad got wrapped up in his usual business chatter, I wandered through the elegant ballroom, trying to take in the buzzing energy of the night. The place was stunning, filled with high-profile guests and conversations I wasn't remotely a part of. Honestly, I felt like a fish out of water, but after years of attending events like this, I'd learned to fake it pretty well. Then David showed up. Flashing his usual charming grin, he came right over to me. "Hey Mike, how's it going?" he asked, his voice as warm and casual as ever. We chatted for a bit, small talk about life, work, and how I was holding up. He even threw in one of his classic compliments about how sharp I looked in the suit Dad had bought for me. I smiled politely, thinking, man, what a thoughtful guy. Looking back now, I can't believe how much trust one put in him that night. After we finished talking, I excused myself. I'd been wandering around for a while and decided to find the bathroom. But as I walked through the hotel's sprawling maze-like hallways, I quickly realized I had no idea where I was going. It was one of those massive places where every corridor looked identical, stretching endlessly in every direction. I stopped in my tracks, completely lost, trying to figure out which way to turn. That's when David reappeared, as if out of nowhere. He smiled again, this time with an almost rehearsed charm, and said, "This place is massive, isn't it? You look a little lost. Need a hand?" Without hesitation I said yes. Why wouldn't I? He was practically family, someone I'd known and trusted for years. I followed him as he led me through the labyrinth of hallways, pointing out a door ahead. "There you go," he said with a casual wave. "That's the restroom." Relieved, I stepped inside. But before I could even close the door, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Spinning around, I saw David slipping into the bathroom and locking the door behind him with a loud, deliberate click. For a split second I froze. The sound of that lock echoed in the small space, and dread began to sink in. Something was off, terribly off. David's entire demeanor had changed. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by something cold, calculating, and unrecognizable. That friendly smile he always wore? It had twisted into a sinister smirk that made my stomach churn. "David, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaky as I tried to keep my composure. But my hands were trembling, and I could feel the fear creeping into my chest. He didn't respond. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable, and took a step closer. I backed away instinctively, but the small bathroom offered nowhere to retreat. My back hit the cold wall and panic set in. The door was locked. I was alone, and I had nowhere to go. "Let me out," I pleaded, trying to sound firm but unable to hide the fear in my voice. "This is the wrong place. You don't have to do this." But David didn't budge. His smile deepened into something even more unsettling. "Relax," he said softly, his voice low and deliberate. "I just want to talk like we always do." Narrator's note. There was something about the way he said it, so calm, so sure of himself, that made my blood run cold. This wasn't the David I thought I knew. The air in the room grew suffocating, thick with tension, and I knew I had to get out of there. But David was too close. His hand landed on my shoulder, firm and unyielding. I recoiled, trying to push him away, but his grip only tightened. That's when I realized how strong he was, stronger than I'd ever imagined. "Let me go, David," I said, my voice rising with desperation. "You can't do this." He leaned in, his voice chillingly calm as he said, "No one's going to hear you, Mike. It's just you and me here." Those words hit me like a freight train. I was trapped completely and utterly. My heart raced as I tried to think of a way out, but my mind was blank with fear. I pushed and struggled, throwing everything I had at him, but it was useless. He was stronger, faster, and entirely in control. For what felt like an eternity, I fought back, screaming and kicking with every ounce of strength I had. But it didn't matter. David was overpowering me, and no one was there to hear me. Narrator's note. You never think something like this will happen to you. Not in a million years. But when it does, it changes everything. The sound of music and laughter from the party echoed faintly through the thick walls, drowning out my screams. I was trapped, terrified, and completely helpless. It felt like hours before I was finally freed from David's grip. Suddenly, the bathroom door burst open, flooding the small space with bright light. My dad, Greg, stormed in, his voice booming with panic. "Megan! Megan, where are you?" he shouted, his face a mask of worry as he rushed toward me. Behind him were several other partygoers, their concerned expressions a blur in the chaos. When his eyes landed on me, shaking and collapsed on the cold floor, his face turned ashen. I could see the heartbreak in his eyes as he fell to his knees and pulled me into his arms. "Megan, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling as he held me close, shielding me from the world. "I should have protected you. I should have been there." His arms wrapped around me tightly, his hands trembling as he tried to comfort me. But I couldn't respond. I felt like a ghost of myself, frozen, hollow, and numb. The room spun around me, blurring into a haze of light and sound. Then my dad turned, his protective embrace replaced by a fury I'd never seen before. He stood and faced David, who was cowering in the corner like a guilty animal. David's face was pale, his usual arrogance stripped away, leaving only fear. For a moment the room fell silent. Then like a dam breaking, my father's rage erupted. "How dare you do this to my daughter?" he roared, his voice shaking the walls. Before anyone could stop him, Dad lunged at David, landing a solid punch that sent him stumbling backward. David barely had time to recover before my dad hit him again, and again. Each blow was fueled by a lifetime of trust betrayed, and the unimaginable pain of seeing his daughter hurt. The room erupted into chaos. People screamed, some trying to pull my dad back, but none were brave enough to get too close. I sat frozen on the floor, unable to move or speak, watching the scene unfold like it was happening in a distant, terrible dream. Every punch my father threw felt like a small piece of justice, but at the same time I felt detached from it all, like I was floating somewhere far away. Eventually, hotel security stormed in, breaking up the fight and dragging my father off David. Greg stood there, his fists trembling, his chest heaving with anger and exhaustion. I couldn't process what had just happened. My mind was blank, my body limp. The nightmare was over, or at least it seemed like it was. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. As my vision blurred, exhaustion and shock finally overtook me, and I collapsed into darkness. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the sterile smell of antiseptic. The bright, cold light above me made my eyes ache as I blinked to adjust. My entire body felt heavy, like I'd been crushed under the weight of a boulder. Every muscle ached, and my head swam with disjointed fragments of the night before. Then it all came rushing back, the fear, the pain, David's face. My chest tightened as the memories overwhelmed me, and I began to sob uncontrollably. Each breath felt like fire in my lungs, and I couldn't stop shaking. I tried to move, but my body was stiff and uncooperative. Even the smallest movement sent waves of pain through me. The trauma was still fresh, clinging to me like a suffocating shadow. Every time the door creaked open, I flinched, my heart racing as if David might walk through at any moment. I felt a warm hand gently grasp mine. Looking up, I saw my dad sitting beside me. His usually strong, commanding face was pale and drawn, his eyes bloodshot and filled with tears. "Megan," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I failed you." His tears fell freely now, landing on our joined hands. My father, the man I'd always seen as unshakable, looked broken. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My lips trembled and my throat felt tight, choked by the overwhelming emotions coursing through me. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he didn't need to blame himself, but I couldn't. The guilt, pain, and weight of everything that had happened left me silent. The legal battle that followed was grueling. At first, some people whispered their doubts, even hinting that I might have misunderstood or exaggerated. But the evidence was undeniable. Medical reports, witness statements, and testimonies from that night painted a clear picture of the horror I had endured. Dad refused to back down. He stood by me every step of the way, his determination unwavering. Seeing me relive every painful detail in court tore him apart, but he never wavered. Testifying was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Each time I spoke, it felt like I was being pulled back into that bathroom, back into the nightmare I desperately wanted to forget. But I pushed through, not just for myself but for others who might face monsters like David. Narrator's note: justice doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't erase the trauma or make everything go back to the way it was. But sometimes standing up and fighting back is all you can do, and that's what we did. Finally, after weeks of tension and emotional exhaustion, the verdict was delivered. David was sentenced to 15 years in prison. As the judge's gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, a wave of relief surged through me. It was over. David would never be able to hurt me or anyone else again. Sitting in the courtroom next to my dad, Greg, I felt his hand tightly gripping mine. He'd been my anchor through all of this, and in that moment, I realized this victory wasn't just mine. It was for every survivor who had been silenced, for everyone who had been too afraid to speak out. I had found my voice, and with it, I had brought David to justice. As the officers led David away in handcuffs, I was flooded with a mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness, and even a faint sense of closure. The nightmare that had haunted my days and consumed my nights was finally behind me. But the relief wasn't just personal. It was bigger than me. The truth was out there, unshakable and undeniable. No matter how much David had tried to bury it, the truth had triumphed. Still, that didn't mean the pain disappeared overnight. The wounds David had left, physical, emotional, and mental, were far too deep to heal quickly. Recovery wasn't a straight line. Some days it felt impossible to even get out of bed. I'd lie there weighed down by despair, wondering if I'd ever feel like myself again. But I wasn't alone. My dad was always there, unwavering and steadfast. He wasn't just my support, he was my lifeline. When I doubted my strength, he reminded me of it. When I stumbled, he was there to catch me. He never stopped believing in me, not even in the moments when I couldn't believe in myself. Little by little, day by day, I began to heal. The scars David had left didn't vanish completely, but they no longer controlled me. I started to rebuild piece by piece, finding a new version of myself. One that was stronger, more resilient, and determined to move forward. Through my dad's unwavering love, I began to see glimmers of hope. His constant presence reminded me that even after the darkest storms, light could break through the clouds. He stood beside me every step of the way, and together, we faced the uncertainties of what lay ahead. Justice had been served, and that gave me a sense of closure, but I knew my journey wasn't over. Healing isn't something that happens overnight. It's slow and messy, full of setbacks and small victories. And that's okay. What mattered most was that I wasn't walking this road alone. Narrator's note: this part of the story isn't just about pain or trauma. It's about what comes after. It's about resilience and the courage to fight back, even when you feel like the odds are stacked against you. I share this not only for myself but for others who might still be trapped in their own silent battles. It's a reminder that silence lets suffering grow, but speaking out, no matter how terrifying it feels, can break those chains. If you're reading this and carrying a burden you think no one could possibly understand, please know that you're not alone. If you feel trapped in the shadows of injustice, I urge you to take a step forward. Speak up. Your voice has power, even when it feels small. Talk to someone you trust, a family member, a friend, or a professional. There are people who will believe you, who will stand by you, and who will help you find your way to healing. Fear may be strong, but it's not invincible. When you choose to act despite that fear, to fight for what's right, you take back your power. You pave the way for healing, for justice, and for hope to grow. Not just for yourself but for others who may one day need the courage to do the same. So to anyone out there suffering in silence, you are not alone. There's a light waiting for you on the other side of the darkness. Take that first step. You are worth it. There is no shame in asking for help, none at all. In fact, it takes immense courage to let others stand beside you, to admit that the weight you're carrying is too heavy to bear alone. You are not alone, even if it feels that way right now. There are people who care deeply about you. People who will listen without judgment, who will offer their shoulders when you need to cry, and who will help you find your way back to strength. When you find the courage to speak up, you take the first step toward change, toward justice, and toward healing. Staying silent out of fear or uncertainty only keeps you trapped in a place where powerlessness thrives. Breaking that silence, though terrifying, is an act of reclaiming your strength and your freedom. Even if you don't feel it right now, you are so much stronger than you realize. That strength might feel distant or hidden, but it's there waiting to rise when you need it most. Healing takes time. It's not a quick fix, and it's certainly not linear. But every time you speak your truth, every time you let someone in, you take another step closer to the life you deserve. A life of peace, justice, and hope. The path to recovery is messy and unpredictable. It's filled with obstacles, with moments of doubt that make the journey feel overwhelming. But with every small step forward, no matter how hesitant, you prove your strength. You show the world and yourself that you are determined to heal. Along the way, remember to treat yourself with compassion. Be as kind to yourself as you would to someone you love. Let go of any guilt or shame holding you back, and embrace the belief that you have the power to overcome. You are not defined by the pain of your past. That pain doesn't own you. What defines you is the resilience you show in moving forward, the courage to dream of a better future, and the strength you demonstrate in each step you take. Narrator's note: this part isn't just about survival. It's about transformation, about using the darkness to grow and become even stronger than you were before. My story has taught me that standing up for what's right isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about creating a ripple effect, a force for good that reaches far beyond your own life. When you speak out, you inspire others to do the same. You break the cycles of silence and suffering so that no one else has to endure what you faced. Advocacy, courage, and truth have the power to transform lives. Not just yours, but countless others. What I've shared with you today isn't just a story of pain and struggle. It's a story of resilience, bravery, and the undeniable power of speaking out. If you're facing a battle of your own, I hope my story reminds you that justice and healing are not beyond your reach. You have the right to live a life of joy, to embrace peace, and to look forward to a future free from the burdens of fear and pain. You are worthy of that happiness. You deserve it. No matter how far away wholeness may seem, it is never out of reach. You carry the strength within you to find it. Life's challenges may feel insurmountable, but you have the courage to rise above them. Even in the darkest of times, light is never truly gone. It may be hidden, but it's always there waiting to shine through. Narrator's final reflection. Let this story be a reminder that no matter how overwhelming life may feel, there is always hope. Darkness isn't eternal, it never has been, and it never will be. There's always a brighter day waiting to break through. I want to thank you for allowing me to share my story with you. What I've told you today is more than a series of events. It's a heartfelt reminder to never lose sight of hope, no matter how far away it may seem. My journey wasn't unique in its challenges, but I hope it resonates with you in its message of resilience and courage. No matter how hard the road ahead may seem, there's always a way forward. If my story has inspired even a glimmer of hope or strength within you, then I've accomplished what I set out to do. I hope it reminds you of the incredible power you hold within yourself, the power to face life's struggles with courage and grace. And most importantly, I hope you remember this. You are never truly alone. Life is a winding, unpredictable road, but it's also filled with opportunities for renewal and growth. Even in your hardest struggles, there's always a glimmer of hope waiting for you at the end. Hold on to that hope. Let it guide you. Believe in brighter days ahead, and in your ability to reach them. You are worthy of the light, the joy, and the peace that await you on the other side of your trials. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to others who may need them.